Hey everybody, Mark here with Coffee and Toys, welcoming you to another weekend review, news, general talk, drinking coffee. And today we're going to talk about something that, as the old Family Guy phrase goes, grinds my gears. But no, it is something that grinds my gears. But it's hopefully I'm going to take today. We're going to do something a little different, a little off the beaten path, a little less news and reviews, and more about how toys are made and terminology, nomenclature, things like that to help understand the toy industry better, understand when you're looking at something what is and is not a prototype. And that's what bothers me. So many things you see today, and I'm guilty of it as well. Everything you see, oh, this prototype's for sale, or this is a prototype, or that's a prototype, when in fact those are not most of the time an actual prototype. Now, before we get into the discussion, we are going to talk about the coffee of the day. And today's coffee is Black Rifle Coffee Gunship. It is a light roast. It is my first time having it today on this channel right now. Okay. It is indeed a light roast, as advertised. Smooth. The box said there was going to be some notes of caramel and stuff like that, and I'm really bad at finding things like that. I am not good at this with coffee or with scotch. Better with scotch, but not so much with coffee. But it is light, it is smooth, and yeah, not too bad. Picked it up at Walmart, figured I'd give it a shot, and I'm enjoying it so far. And I'm normally not a light roast guy. It is a little bit on the... feels like it's a little more on the watery side, but that could just be the way I make it. So we have that out of the way, and let's talk about this whole toys and prototypes and how prototypes became to mean a much bigger word than what it probably should mean. So let's just take a quick how toys are made. So obviously you have an idea. You sketch the idea, you 3D sculpt the idea in your application of choice. Back in the day, you actually sculpted it with your hands. And you kind of went from there deciding on, okay, this is a toy. And we'll use G.I. Joe as an example because that's something that I see a lot of this in. But you see it everywhere. You see it with Spin Master. You see it with, any toy. There's going to be prototypes and there's going to be prototypes, and there's going to be pre-production figures and whatnot. So the whole point of this is you sculpt the figure either by hand or digitally, and you get the figure the way you want to make it. Now, back in the day, they would sculpt onto existing figures, way back in the day, like G.I. Joe, 1980s era and before. You would sculpt with clay putty, whatever you needed to use to make the figure. Now, today, they just obviously do digital renders, and they say, hey, we're going to make a figure this way. And either way, once you have a figure kind of the way you want it designed, you have to have molds made of that figure. And there's a whole process of making molds, but eventually it becomes a steel mold. Steel mold. So, if you've never seen a steel mold, it's a large piece of metal, obviously steel, that plastic is injected into when it's been melted down. And you inject the plastic into these molds, and that's how your figure's made. And again, I'm giving just a kind of a very high overview. So you have to have a mold made for each piece, essentially, of an action figure. And a lot of times you can get a lot of pieces in the same piece of steel. With that steel piece, you can have, a left and a right hand. Or a left and a right hand, a left and a right arm, blah, blah, blah. Just, depending on the size of the mold itself, that piece of steel you can put so many pieces into. It works especially well if it's a mirror image. You can say, oh, I've got a left and a right arm, and they look completely identical other than the hands. So we'll do everything but the hands in here. We'll do everything but the legs in here, if they can fit. And anyway, so you do that. The molds get injected with this plastic, and something comes out. And just to jump straight to the point, whatever that something that comes out is not a prototype. That is a pre-production piece. And what I mean by that is simply when they get these molds created, to make sure the molds look right, that the figure that's going to come out looks right, they push whatever color plastic they have. And that is why you see so many prototypes that are just multicolored whatevers. And in reality, those aren't prototypes, those are pre-production pieces. That is them testing the molds, testing what the figure's actually going to look like when they, push it out, and before they actually do it in the production color scheme and apply paint apps and whatever. So whenever you're online, you're looking at a prototype, and it's in 3 different colors, and somebody's saying, yeah, we're going to sell this to you for $500. It's just a pre-production piece. It's nothing, it's special. Don't get me wrong. It is special. I have plenty of pre-production pieces of figures that wound up being canceled. And now that's kind of the other part too, and we'll get into that in a minute. But a figure that you see that is fully built and just in wild, wacky colors or no color at all is not a prototype in the most technical sense. It is just a pre-production piece. Whereas a prototype is actually something that has been built or made and will likely never see the light of day. It's kind of a first run of, hey, this is what this figure is going to look like. A prime example to you G.I. Joe collectors, you probably already know this, but for folks that aren't G.I. Joe collectors, I'm sure it's in other lines as well. Masters of the Universe had these. You will see pictures online of what's a good example? Tomax and Zaymont is a good example from the original 1982-1994 run of G.I. Joe. If you look at pictures from magazines selling the G.I. Joe toys, and they first showed Tomax and Zaymont, those are prototype figures. The faces are completely different than what actually got created. It wasn't something that was molded and ran through at least the heads were never created to look like what the final version of the figure was. It was a prototype, something they were playing with, trying to get the right look for the figures, and ultimately they changed the head sculpts completely from what was in the magazine. That would be considered a pre-production piece versus a prototype, versus a, I think I just got my words. That would be a prototype versus a pre-production piece that is something this is what the figure looks like. Maybe it looks like it's in a wild and wacky color, but that's it. But we have over time conflated that to, oh, this is a prototype too, because it's not the production run. And that's what kind of confuses everybody today, is everybody just saying, using the word prototype. It's a buzzword. It's something people can easily key up and say, I'm looking for a prototype of this, figure line, and I want to buy one of it. So they type in prototype, and all these pictures come up, and they're not actually prototypes. Now let's go back for a moment, and I hope you're enjoying this. If you are, give me a big old thumbs up. If you think I'm crazy, tell me that in the comments, because I am, and I'm not going to disagree with you. And just to be clear, I'm not necessarily a toy expert. It's just years of hanging around with people that know the industry and are working in the industry has given me some of this knowledge. And again, it's not absolute. It's nothing you can't find out there on the interwebs yourself. I'm just talking about it because I like talking about it. So we were talking about the molds, and something a lot of people don't understand is what happens to the molds. The big thing is back in the again, to use G.I. Joe as an example, back in the late 90s, they did a Hall of Fame series. I think it was called. They were going to release some 3-packs. It's actually the 3-pack. One of them was what Pimp Daddy Destro came in, aka Profit Director Destro nowadays, came in, and they originally showed some prototypes in the sense that they showed some repainted figures, and that was going to be what they were going to make. And one of them was a Cobra Commander version 1, painted in a dark blue scheme with a gold face mask. And that was going to be in this figure set. And they ultimately did not produce that Cobra Commander because they did not have the molds. The molds have been lost. Now, there's a lot of rumors on what happened to those molds, but again, these are big steel molds that have to be created, and somewhere big, large steel molds have to be kept when they're not in use. And so what happened to those molds? We don't know. The rumor is they were bringing those molds either back to the United States, or maybe they were on their way to some other country for, I don't know. But the rumor is they were on a ship, the ship sank, or the ship lost them. Something happened. They did not have the version 1 Cobra Commander mold anymore, so they could not make the figure they had planned on making. And they did have the molds to the version 3, the Battle Armor Cobra Commander, and that's ultimately what we got in that package. And you can even see, if you go on eBay or the like today and you want to buy that 3-pack, even the packaging art uses the V1 Cobra Commander as what's supposed to be in the package. But inside the package is clearly a blue and gold Battle Armor Cobra Commander. And that is the reason. It was the same way for the Destro that was in that pack that became the Pimp Daddy Destro. It was, I believe, originally going to be the version 1 Destro figure, and they did not have the mold, so they had to use the version 3 Destro, which they did have. And yeah, so you have to store these molds somewhere. And I was talking to a friend, it's been a while now, but they're in the process of creating their figures. And I was asking about, hey, how does this work when you build out a figure? Obviously you have the molds. And he's like, yeah, well, we try to, as many pieces as we try to produce of a figure, the more pieces we use, the more figures that have the same pieces are all in the same mold. And every time they need to call that factory to make the figures, it costs money to go get the molds wherever they're at. Now, the way I understand it in this particular scenario, and I imagine it's in most, they charge to store the molds. So if you're not using them in the factory, they have to go somewhere and get these molds and bring them to the factory. Now, I don't know if it's across the street or in the same place and they just have to go get it out of another building or what, but it costs money to get those figures, molds, out of a building to the factory to inject with plastic to make a pre-production figure or a production run of figures. So he was telling me, he said, we try to use the same parts for most of our figures to save money because we know when we pull that mold out, if we're making 5 figures and 4 of them all have the same leg mold, we're saving money by using that same leg mold. And that is what G.I. Joe did and Masters of the Universe did, probably even to a greater extent than G.I. Joe, is, they would just get that mold out and run it forever, That's why all your He-Mans and Skeletors and Man-at-Arms and yada, yada, yada all have the same body from the neck down. It's just different, well, mostly from the neck down. Because they're trying to maximize that, and I doubt that's changed over time. It certainly hasn't today from the way I've been told about it. So again, it's beneficial to get all those pieces in the same mold for saving cost. And so they have to store these molds when they're not in use, and they get charged money for that. And then ultimately these molds wind up disappearing because of one reason or another. I mean, if you're an American-based toy company like Hasbro, Mattel, even the small startups, it's really hard to know what's going on over in Vietnam, China, etc. when you don't have eyes. Now, there's a lot of, obviously a lot of companies and even startups have someone that's, eyes on the ground that's working for the company, making sure everything's going legit in the factory, but they don't have any control over the factory ultimately. The factory is essentially contracted out by the company that's producing the figure, saying, make these figures for us. But that's about it. It's not like Hasbro owns a production factory in China. One day they might be making G.I. Joes or Marvel Legends, and then next week they might be making, Hello Kitty stuff. I don't know. But they make whatever they need to make there. It's not exclusive to, it might be. If you know, let me know. I know you can go to Hasbro's website and you can see all the factories they work with in China and Vietnam and where else in the world. Now they might have, I don't know if they have an exclusive contract with those companies and says, hey, you're only going to make Hasbro stuff here, but they're not just making one toy line at that factory. They are making multiple toy lines and likely multiple toy lines belonging to multiple IPs belonging to different companies. So I've always thought that fascinating. You could just walk into a factory in China and, you might see a ton of G.I. Joe classified figures just laying there in a pile that are rejects. And then over in another pile might be, Barbie. Who knows? But if we go back to the prototype versus pre-production pieces, prototypes are very hard to find. There's not a lot of prototypes. You could argue that if you have a true one-of-a-kind item, that's a prototype. There's not going to be many of them around. Now, there might not be a lot of pieces of pre-production pieces either. You might see something on eBay that says prototype. It's actually a pre-production piece, but there might only be like one or two available for sale every blue moon. But the fact is, when they do these runs, they're running random plastics and checking those molds and making lots of figure test shots. That's another word for these pre-production figures, is test shots. They're testing the molds. They're seeing what it's going to look like. But nothing about them is exclusively unique, other than if they completely cancel the figure later. That's kind of where the exclusivity comes in. A good example of that from my own collection is Jungle Pursuit Cobra Commander. It was the Cobra Commander after Rise of Cobra and before Pursuit of Cobra. They did a Cobra Commander that was kind of a mix between the two. He had the movie look from Rise of Cobra for the face, and then he had his kind of jungle outfit on. It was a jungle outfit, and then it later became just kind of they swapped the palette color, and it wound up just being a blue. But that would be an example of a figure that was canceled, but technically the version I have is a fully produced figure. It's not a prototype per se. It was a figure that was going to be made. It was completely created. They liked it. They ran the molds. It looked good. They put the paint apps on it. They were going to produce this figure. And they did another test run of it. And then they said, nope. Somebody at Hasbro said, nope, we're not doing this. We're changing it around. We're not going to produce this figure. And so they scrapped it. So that is a production level test shot-ish figure that was ready to go and was canceled. It's a canceled figure. That's probably the best way to describe it. It is a figure that was canceled. It's no longer going to be produced, but it had made it all the way through the process of having a mold created for it, for the various pieces to make it, and then ran through his test shots. There's probably funny colored ones out there in a ditch somewhere in China. And then they produced it with the actual colors, and then someone said, nope, we're not doing this, restart. So, have I confused you yet? It's a confusing process, I'm not going to lie. You have to really think about it. And that's why it's easy just to say, oh, this figure is a prototype. But it's not, in the end. And I'm not knocking people for saying it. It's just one of those things where it's like, hey, a little bit of education goes a long way. But what else can we talk about with these figures that are prototypes, test shots? Really, that's really about it. I wish I had prepped a little better for this video and actually gotten some figures out to show you the difference between a prototype, a test shot, a production piece, a canceled piece. But I didn't have the time, and I apologize for that. That being said, if you ever want to get into the weeds of exclusivity, you can buy these type of things. They're out there. There are a lot of different ways to buy canceled figures, pre-production pieces, even prototypes, or molds. You can buy molds if you can find the right person or have the right connections. But they are going to cost a lot of money. And at the end of the day, you have to decide what kind of collector you are. Because I was that collector at one point. I wanted to have complete runs, as they call them, of a figure. And all a run means is that you have from start to finish of a production piece, which means you have the artwork. You have the molds, if possible. You have the prototype or the pre-production pieces, or, everything about that figure from start to end, you have it. And people do that, especially in the G.I. Joe community. I'm sure in the Masters of the Universe community, it's harder to do nowadays with figures because everything's digital. But when they were still, putting pen and pencil to paper and, drawing the actual figure was going to be created, that's some of the coolest stuff out there. I'm not going to lie. And there are a lot of great collectors in the community that are documenting that. So if you have a favorite particular toy run, they do it for G.I. Joe, they do it for Masters of the Universe. I'm sure they do it for other brands as well. Go look them up, find out all the information, and start making connections if you want pieces like that. And that's really how you're going to get them, because the people that have them aren't going to go out and just generally publicly say, oh, I have these pieces, because they would be hounded all day. And I can understand that. I have some pieces that I don't necessarily want to be hounded about. So, and again, I'm like this in the community. I'm nothing. I'm here. I'm that. I'm nothing. But I know there's folks out there that have crazy pieces of art, and that's what I call them. They are artwork. But production, pre-production, prototype pieces like that. And they don't want to be bothered. But if you know the right people and you make the right connections and you're really interested in it, you too can own a piece of, your favorite collection's history. And it's cool stuff. But again, the point of this today was just to talk about prototypes, production pieces, pre-production pieces, test shots, all the fun stuff. I just wanted to change it up today because there wasn't a lot of news that interested me. I've had a really busy week. That being said, I don't know if there'll be a video next week because of the holiday weekend. I have my folks are coming in to help to hang out, help take care of some things around the house, or actually help watch my kid while I take care of some things that need to be done before the summer. Get all our stuff in order before the next kid comes. And so I don't know. I'm going to try to make a video next week. I still have a lot of reviews coming up. So if you're interested in my reviews, thank you, for watching them so far. I have a lot more Master of the Universe Origins. I still have the Jedi Knight Luke Skywalker that I need to do a review of because he looks so cool. He's literally just laying right down here, and I need to get him out of the package and review him because I really am excited to review him. And I saw a couple other Black Series ones from the new Jedi Survivor game, and I was like, ooh, I kind of want those. And I had to stop trying to scratch that itch. But man, it's there. The Black Series is trying to pull me back in. I tell you what, that's a hard battle, right? When you say you're not going to collect figures and then you see something you really want and you're like, ooh, is it going to pull me back in? But yeah, so that's what I want to talk about. If you made it this far in the video, I appreciate it. If you give me a thumbs up, like this video, hit the subscribe button down below. We're on that march to 500 subscribers. And of course, once we hit the 500 subscribers, I'm going to do a live stream. I'm going to do some giveaways to all my subscribers that are currently subscribed that day. If you are subscribed the day I do the live stream, I'm going to throw your name in a randomizer and I'm going to give away at least 5. I've upped it for 500. We're going to give away 5 prizes. Go to G.I. Joe Classified Series. We're going to do Star Wars Black Series. We're going to do Masters of the Universe, either Origins and or Masterverse. And I'll probably throw a couple other random things in there. Who knows? But I've decided it's going to be 5. 5 giveaways for my subscribers. So please, hit the subscribe button, the bell notification, switch it to all notifications. I put out multiple videos a week, reviewing toys, action figures, talking about things I like, talking about things you want to hear about. Again, my name is Mark. This is Coffee and Toys, and I will see you later.